this video a second time, which is irritating. Computer froze. It's been working perfectly for like a month and a half because I haven't turned it off. And so the power went out last night. Now it's back to crashing for no reason. Just irritating. It's just anyway, not your problem, but just life. Anyway, so hopefully it won't happen again too soon. Anyway, I figure comment video, just the usual, more of this aberration conversation, which I don't know, has turned into some other conversation. So I'll explain. But anyway, I was thinking in the future I will try to make a video pointing out that the universe's function is basically just a speed trap kind of function. It's just taking stuff that's going the speed of light and it's converting it into stuff that doesn't go the speed of light, meaning the stuff going the speed of light is caught in traps that process, essentially. So something that's going the speed of light ends up going 3 miles an hour in terms of it never, the trap. It always ends up where it started, maybe a little bit forward, maybe a little bit forward. So something that was happening, that was going to happen, very fast, it doesn't happen for a long time because the process has been slowed down by causing the stuff to move in directions that aren't in the direction it would have moved if it went in a straight line. So it's just a kind of speed change. And that's the difference between the force moving the speed of light and the matter that doesn't move anything until it traps this force, and then it moves. So everything the universe is doing is just about stuff moving, and the important feature is moving much slower, which means actions that would have happened don't happen because the stuff takes too long to get there, you could say. But that's all the universe is so that's sort of the warping of time, in a sense, that the force is slowed down by being processed through matter. Alright, so this subject was started by aberration, which was this argument that if there was two bodies and they were gravitationally involved, they're going to have stuff happening. Like this one will move towards this one, that'll cause this one to move towards. There are interactions that are happening between them, but those interactions add to what happens outside of them, what something external to the two will see in terms of more or less gravity. And the only important point is that the gravity already exists in the thing. The thing's already creating it by having matter that's all trying to get to the center. It's all being pushed towards the center. So it's all moving towards the center all the time. And that movement is trapping force, catching it in traps, and therefore that stuff isn't moving it's not going anywhere. It's just moving, just vibrating. And that's the initiation of the change in the environment. By doing this, the matter doing this, it means force that was going this way doesn't get where it's going. Force going this way doesn't get where it's going. And that's the cause of gravity. So the external force is stronger than the force that goes through something because this force gets slowed down. It takes a while for the force to get back out again. And that creates gravity. So it doesn't matter where the position is. The gravity already exists. So when something's moving, the argument for aberration is this thing would be casting a shadow, and the shadow would be bounced back, in a sense, the information. But it would bounce back to the location where the thing used to be. So if it had a velocity, it would move away from the gravity. But the point is no, it can't move away from it because the gravity's everywhere. So the aberration argument is stupid. Okay, because it lacks appreciation for the fact that the gravity is created on the inside things. You can only change by adding a new thing. You don't change the gravity this thing has. You change the total gravity out here. You don't change the total gravity of that thing. by moving, you affect the things forward of you, not the things behind you. It's another way to say it. Okay. Thank you for proving my point that your understanding of math is below a 5th grade level. Well, again, it's not. So I took high school trigonometry and stuff like that. So just bullshit comment. This has nothing to do with math in the sense that it's, you know, the inverse square is not a complex piece of math. Squaring a radius is not that complicated. I told you that electromagnetic force is 10 to the 40 times stronger than gravity. Well, you say it is, but see, that's because you don't understand the difference between the two things. You're saying that a material thing that's mostly empty space, okay, that's a fact. All right, mostly not particles, mostly empty space. And you're going to compare it to an interaction between electron and electron where there is no empty space. All the interactions are complete. There's no, I missed you. Okay, it's a complete interaction. So you're comparing apples and oranges or kumquats and penguins. It's not a fair comparison because the interaction, the force happens on the nuclear level. The electrons and the protons, the force is 100%. It's not. I missed all your hard bits. I missed all your electrons and protons because you were mostly empty space. I missed you. They don't do any of that. So these are just pretend numbers made up by your fake notions of reality, just like your fake notion of how slits are made out of solid material or something, but you don't understand there's atoms on the surfaces of materials. So you don't understand any of this physics idea that physics means you have to think in terms of what something's made of, and that they're made of different things. Earths are not electrons. They're two different kind of things. Earths are actually made of electrons and protons. Electrons and protons aren't made of Earths. Can you understand that? Anyway. I told you the electromagnetic force is 10 to the 40 times stronger than gravity, and you tell me it's because the force bits bounce back 1 trillion times more in magnetism. I'm telling you that the r squared number becomes tiny, tiny, tiny. Okay, so you're dividing a much smaller number into the mass of the electron. And I'm telling you also that the force is segregated, which means that it's the difference between me hitting you. Let's say I had baseballs and wiffle balls, and if I hit you with 500 of them, okay, and 250 are baseballs and 250 are wiffle balls, it's going to have a dramatically different effect than if all of them are baseballs. And so what the charge element means is that when you segregate the force through magnetism or charge does the same thing. It turns something big into essentially an electron or a proton in terms of its surface. And when you do that, and you segregate the force, then it's like an increase in magnitude of the effect, because there's so much more volume to the force that's hitting you, because you've segregated out the force that doesn't disturb you, and you're only getting hit with stuff that matters. Cannonballs. You figured the phrase 1 trillion times sounds impressive enough to bamboozle your way through an explanation. Well, I could have said 1 trillion times, but yes, who cares? And it probably fooled many of your supporters. There's no fooling going on. So again, this notion that you're saying, because we have a different understanding of the mechanics, you know, that you have to add all this nonsense rhetoric, okay? And I'm saying it's nonsense. I mean, comparing an electron, a solid thing, to an Earth, which isn't solid, I'm just arguing that's a silly comparison. So your number is a distortion of reality in the first place. Sounds impressive enough, okay. And it probably fooled many of your supporters, but you don't seem to know that 1 trillion is merely 10 to the 12th. Like I said, I could have said 1 trillion. Any reasonable person knows that electron is very, very small compared to the size of the Earth. Okay, I mean, we can do even atoms. So, you know, an atom is to an apple as an apple is to the Earth. Okay, so, and electrons are even smaller. The R squared number, very, very small. Okay, the difference between 10 to the 12th, 28 orders of magnitude, 10 to the 40, really big number. Yes, so what? What does it have to do with understanding conceptually the difference between the nuclear universe of an electron and the world that Earth is? How it's functionally made. Earths are made of atoms. No one's making an argument that electrons are made of atoms with mostly empty space in them. It is the reason a single electron can outmuscle the entire Earth's gravity. So of course, obviously that doesn't happen. The amount of force the Earth is consuming, the momentum, is insanely high. It's moving every electron and proton towards the sun. A huge amount of force is being applied. And obviously one electron is only a tiny, tiny bit of force affects an electron and makes it move. Because of the electron's small mass relative to the strength of the force. So obviously the force is going to have more effect on an electron. One element of force hitting an electron will cause the electron to move. One element of force hitting the Earth will cause nothing to happen. All by its solitary lonesome. So now he says this technically. You're not talking technically. You're talking in mush terms, making apple and orange comparisons. There's no technicality to how you're thinking here. You're saying it's appropriate to compare a complex structure made of electrons and protons to electrons and protons. No, that's just not a reasonable thing to do. Technically there's another electron involved, so it's two electrons, but that doesn't matter when we are discussing orders of magnitude. Well, he says it doesn't matter. I'm clearly arguing that it matters. It's the entire difference. So reflections are incredibly important, and they only happen between electrons and electrons and protons and protons. And it's only between the electrons in the Earth and the protons in the Earth that this process takes place. And the Earth obviously isn't segregating the force enough. Its magnetic field is really weak compared to a regular magnet. So it's obviously not doing enough segregating of the force to magnify the force to any extent. Your silly explanation of magnetism is just too sad. Again, the videos are there to make an argument. You're not making an argument that matters. You're just saying some generic insult thing. You're just insulting the theory. You're not explaining why it's wrong. For anyone who understands 5th grade math or better, again, this has nothing to do with math. There's no math in conflict here. As pointed out, Maxwell's equations are basically talking about a straight line force radiating. That's what the R squared law is completely based on, is straight line force and spherical symmetry. So there's no inconsistency. So it says, sorry, no sale. And there's no sale. Why? Because you don't want to have a conversation about physics. You want to pretend that galaxies are just like solar systems, and solar systems are just like atoms, and atoms are just like electrons. So electrons are really galaxies. All right. I just want to highlight this because it's so laughable. At 8:18, you say gravity doesn't point. The argument for our aberration is essentially that the gravity does point, in the sense that the gravity is made and it shoots to a specific location. And aberration means that because the thing's moving, it's somehow going to move out of the gravity. The gravity went here. See, it moved, and the gravity went here, and it missed it. That's the aberration argument. And I've explained why that's just nonsense. And I've explained it as a dampening argument. The system has a cushion built into it, so the gravity already exists, and a new object can't create gravity inside. It can only create gravity outside. Just like I'm only creating gravity that way. Okay, not that way. I'm creating pressure this way, creating gravity that way. Alright, at 8.18 you say gravity doesn't point, and then talk about how you don't need an object to be somewhere for gravity to be there. Gravity just means there's a differential in the pressure. So if we could agree that that's what gravity is. Gravity is just a change in the pressure. So there's more pressure on one side than there is on the other side, and the thing moves into the low pressure. Now, you have some other notion maybe, but when Susskind basically, the king of California physics, explains Einstein's relativity, he explains it by describing an even level of pressure where you add pressure from an external source or you lose pressure through a drain. So you either have a waterfall that puts more water in the lake, or you have a drain that drains water out of the lake. If that isn't a pressure argument, I don't know what is, right? I mean, you can't get more obviously a pressure argument. So again, this hostility veiled in some kind of, as if I'm saying something other than that. That's explicitly what I'm saying. So the pressure difference exists whether something is in there or not. So the river has a flow. There doesn't have to be any sticks in it to move around. And if there are sticks in it, then they create a change outside of where the stick is, not inside of where the stick is. No one said otherwise. The argument for aberration is an otherwise argument. It's basically saying that somehow the position of the objects makes a difference because the speed of gravity is too slow, and so the gravity won't exist where the thing moved out of it. That's the whole fucking point of the argument being made, you idiot. Shit, no one's saying otherwise. That's exactly what it's saying. It's saying Lesage gravity doesn't account for it. Well, it does account for it if you allow it to. If you allowed Lesage, if you could dig him up and give him some modern knowledge of nuclear physics, he would just point to exactly what I'm pointing to and say, well, look, there's the explanation. It's not dependent on time. So your point is a non sequitur. No, your point is obviously totally disconnected from the actual subject, which was the aberration issue. In that space where there isn't any object, you realize that there is a pressure force difference that points down, right? Well, I'm obviously saying down is a silly concept in this discussion, because I'm clearly pointing out that it's the high pressure that's pushing, always. Always. Low pressure doesn't pull. High pressure pushes. Always. That's what is meant by saying gravity points. And again, you're missing the point. The aberration argument is that gravity points to a location where the object no longer is. Seriously, it's so obvious what was meant by that statement. Again, you don't seem to understand what was obvious is I'm reading a paragraph called aberration and explaining how it's not a counter-argument to a particle gravity theory. A particle gravity theory accounts for it. And their only explanation for how Einstein accounts for it was to say some sort of the velocity-dependent function or something. Fixes it. An empty statement. Only you would be the one to misinterpret it. I didn't misinterpret anything. You're not on the subject. You do realize that when objects move, they have a velocity and acceleration vector, right? Well, obviously they don't have an acceleration vector if they're not being accelerated, asshole. They either have a velocity. Now those objects are objects that can maintain a velocity is a whole nother subject, right? I'm contending that electrons don't maintain velocity and that protons don't maintain velocity. And the only thing that can maintain velocity is something like a hydrogen or a helium nucleus. And anything smaller than that will lose its velocity. They'll decelerate. Even in your model, it is emergent average net vector. So clearly I'm arguing that dimensions are real, and that if something's moving this way, you can understand it dimensionally, that it has a component in this dimension and has a component in this dimension. You can understand that. That doesn't mean it has that's any real property. It just means that that's what its potential, that's what it can be converted into, is to say it's this. So that's 40% energy going this way. If there was something hitting here, it would feel 40% of the energy. And it could feel 60%. If there was something over here, it would feel 60% of the energy. So it can be, the energy can be converted. It can be split through an interaction. But it requires an interaction. You have to hit something for that to happen. You have to force the selection of a dimension. You have to force it to influence, just count the influence in one dimension. To say otherwise would be to deny the breakthrough of calculus and mechanics that Newton discovered. Again, he discovered a way of formalizing that understanding. But first you have to have the understanding that there are, say, 3 dimensions and, say, 6 subdimensions. Forward, back, up, down, left, right. The problem that you were discussing still stand. The problem that you were discussing still stand. No, it doesn't, even if gravity is always on. How can it possibly still stand? There's no issue that you're going to miss the gravity, because the thing that's affecting you now is things on the surface, like I'm making the gravity the moon's falling into. I said those exact words. I'm doing it. Okay, the moon isn't doing it. I'm doing it. Now, what something else falls into, the moon can create. But I'm creating the gravity that's making the moon fall. No one said gravity isn't always on. Well, again, that's exactly what the argument is that it's only on in one tiny location. That the information shoots from the moon to the earth, and then the earth shoots it back, and it sends the information to the wrong location. That's the fucking argument, you idiot. That's your misinterpretation of the argument. No, it isn't. It's your misinterpretation. So you're being this obnoxiously arrogant when you don't even understand the subject. Okay, and lastly, at 11:10, you say there's no such thing as Newtonian mechanics. Yeah, I say there's no generalization that makes any sense. To say something that's like Einstein mechanics, or to do any of that simplification is to rape okay, the details that are fundamental to the argument. And so, to say that there's this difference between modern physics in terms of mechanics, no, modern physics only adds crap. It doesn't really subtract from Newton. It doesn't take away, anything Newton described as the effect. The effects haven't changed since Newton, and all you've done is change what you're stating are causes, which Newton never described. So how can you say there's Newtonian mechanics that are somehow different than the mechanics that still exist? There's no different mechanics. There's no different function. There's no different outcome. There's no different effect. There's just you stating you think you know what the cause is. And you're wrong. You know what? Okay. That's all that people need to hear about you. Okay, so again, because I don't think it's very bright to imply that Newton's mechanics aren't solid, that it's not broken. Now all you're saying is it doesn't have electric seats, and it doesn't have an instant windshield cleaner, and it doesn't have all this extra bullshit. It doesn't mean that it's not a car. Newton's mechanics is a good car, works, and all you're saying is it needs these bells and whistles of your fake causes. And they're fake causes, they're bullshit. I don't know, why is this here twice? 20 minutes ago. I think it's the same comment. I just want to highlight this because it's laughable. At 8:18 you say gravity doesn't point. object somewhere, let's see. And then talk about how you don't need an object to be anywhere for gravity to be there. No, one said otherwise. Yeah, we already did that. Yeah, so it looks like that's just a stand even if gravity is always on. So, no, it doesn't still stand. So, you're just wrong. And I think I've said enough to allow somebody reasonable to understand why you're wrong. I think I've done that. Okay, so let me reload this to see if there's anything new. Alright, so the Robert Ritchie guy did say, gravity, Gary, just a comment from my perspective. All mass acts as a drain. Well, drain is just, again, that's Einstein mush. Drain to where? You can't destroy the energy. And my simple argument is the only thing happening in the universe, again, is you're turning a force that's going the speed of light, and you're doing this to it. And it just isn't going the speed of light anymore. It's doing, it might get from here to there, eventually, but it's going to get there so much slower because it's doing this trapped circular thing. And you can almost understand it. Like I could take a steel bar in space and I could hit it, put a little motor on the end of it. And initially the motor's going to push it and it's going to start to, move and turn in space by a certain amount. But what you can't change is the initial direction. So, steel bar, little motor here. It doesn't move this steel bar straight up, right? It causes it to twist and move. And I don't know exactly by what percentages. It's a whole, because the idea is you're moving it disproportionately to its center of gravity hasn't been established yet. So, you're moving more mass in one direction than the other direction until they get the rotation going faster and faster, then the precession will become a straight line. But at first, it's going to be a really crookedy, strange line. But that's the basic concept, is that, there's no, there's conservation, but you have to think of the conservation in terms of an equalization of the momentum, and it takes time for the momentum to move through the object that you're actually moving, the steel bar or whatever it's made out of. The energy has to move through it and through its center of gravity, which is going to constantly change position as it's being rotated. And so what you're basically doing is you sent it in this direction, and then everything after that is going to become a circle eventually. So eventually those circles just wipe out all that directionality, because it means you had thrust this way and thrust this way and thrust down and thrust this way and thrust this. So all of those cancel out. But the one you never cancel out is the first one. It will go that way. It just won't go that way in a straight line. But it's going to go that way much slower than the movement of the thrusted piece. All right. All mass acts as a drain to gravity, and space acts as a source of gravity. So I'm just saying that, yes, obviously I'm just saying that that's how Susskind describes it, okay? But that doesn't explain either where it comes from or where it goes. So I'd say that's a conservation issue. And I'm giving you an explanation where it goes. Where it goes is from the speed of light to something much slower than the speed of light. That's the change in the force. And when you change it, that means something that was going to hit something doesn't hit something. And that's important. If you've slowed it down, then the interaction isn't going to happen over here. And this thing's going to act as if no force is coming. That's just a fact. That's the consequence of delaying the reaction. Is the thing that the action isn't happening now, he's going to have to act as if, he didn't show up. I have to move into the space. There's more pressure this way than this way. The pressure is now uneven. The pressure changes when you change the speed. All right. It will be a few weeks before I can set up an actual physics experiment. Well, I don't know which one you're setting up, but obviously you do a lot of spinning disk stuff, and that's exactly what I'm sort of talking about. And you know that at a slow speed, you can feel it. You can feel the center of gravity moving. And when you get the speed higher and higher and higher, that center of gravity becomes more and more stable. and now you have a hard time moving it. Okay, it becomes heavy. You can't get it to go somewhere else. It doesn't want to go anywhere else. The center of gravity gets so established. And that's the argument I'm making, is this is just a motion argument. All the momentum is still there, and it's being converted by the center of gravity. And when you have an axle in there that forces it to stay, then you can feel all of the math that's taking place. You're converting momentum going this way into momentum going this way into momentum going this way, and all those conversions happen to the center of gravity, through the center of gravity. That's the wobble. That's the procession. Let's see, looking forward to future dialogue. We'll see. The problem I have understanding, so this is Steve Beck, the source and drain is, where does the drained gravity go? Exactly. You have to account, there's no drain. So all you can do is delay something. You can't prevent it. You can't stop it. You can't, it's inevitably going to get where it's going. All you can do is slow it down. All you can do is distract it by putting it in this trap. The trap is the universe. Trapping stuff going the speed of light, forcing it into circles, is the entire function of the universe. That's it. That's what it does. That's its primary function, is converting things going the speed of light into things not going the speed of light. And how does the source keep producing gravity? Exactly. And obviously that's the harder question, just because obviously I can cite the cosmic background radiation. So we already know there's a source of energy that's sort of unaccountable. And so all we're basically saying is we can't see gravity. We can't, make a gravity satellite, or something. We can't see it. But obviously it's there, because we're feeling it. I mean, we're watching this stuff getting pushed by it, so we know it's there. So obviously I would just say the same source for the cosmic background radiation is the same source for the gravity. So it just keeps coming. The lights are always on. And I would argue that it's probably because the universe is in a bubble. This is really draft. So this I'm just making up as an imagination of an explanation, because I believe in energy conservation. And it always bothered me, the idea that photons are leaving the universe, and how the hell could they ever come back? They can't come back. It's not possible. So the universe is somehow just dissipating photons that go forever into nothing. So that doesn't make much sense. So part of me says there has to be a container. The photon bounces back as gravity. So it goes into the wall as a photon. It comes out of the wall as something else. Just like you can shoot, ultraviolet light at something and you'll get back a bunch of white light. Alright, it's like positive charges and negative charges for electric forces. Well, see, gravity is made of that, but that's the scale argument. Then you have to understand that, okay, what's really causing the gravity? Well, gravity is really moving electrons and protons, and you can only move electrons and protons by applying electron force to electrons and proton force to protons. And so clearly the gravity has to have a charge component. But the obvious argument is gravity only seems to do one kind of thing, attraction. And it's only doing that mechanically because motion absorbs force. For a piece of matter to move, it has to absorb a force, has to put it in a trap. And so it has the initial motion, and it traps it. So just as I was pointing out, if I put a little motor on it, I put a stick in space and it's dead still. I put a little motor on one side. There's just no way to stop it. The stick will go that way. It won't go that way, or it certainly won't go this way towards me. It's going to go in the direction that it's pointing initially. And the same thing happens when you trap, energy in an electron. The initial motion is conserved. Alright, it's like positive charges, negative charge, and electric forces. One of the charges is the source and the other charge is the drain. Well, I think that's just totally wrong way to look at it. they're purely yin-yang. Neither one of them, you can't tell which one's yinning and which one's yanging. Okay, they're going to do a competing thing because of the attraction between the different particle, the electron and proton, and the repulsion between all the electrons and the repulsion between all the protons. So to call one a drain and to call one a pusher is, I think, just completely making a mess of things. That's not how gravity works. And yeah, so that doesn't work as an argument for me. What's happening with gravity is that the electrons are being hit by the electron force, even though it's only 50% of the gravity, the force hitting them. It's only 50%, but that 50% counts in a direction, and the protons are likewise being hit by 50% of the force that's moving them in the right direction. And because you haven't segregated the force, where you're hitting all the electrons with just electron force and all the protons with electron force, it's a subtly weak force by comparison because it's not segregated. You're wasting a lot of the force, so to speak. But it's clearly always in one direction, from high pressure to low pressure. And so it just has to do with the fact that some other object moving towards you is absorbing force to do that. And that absorption has a consequence where now you're imbalanced. It takes your balanced field and makes it imbalanced. It's that simple. And once your field is imbalanced, you have to move from the high pressure to the low pressure. I mean, if I had a motor going the opposite direction on the stick, one going this way and one going this way, well, then it's balanced. But when there's an imbalance, it's going to move in the direction of the imbalance. All right, so that's it. I think I might as well check the spam folder just for fun. Yeah. All right. Alright, so that's just an old one. Alright, so good. I mean, it's better to have comments, but again, it's just so unnecessary, where there's specific points being made. And why can't you just argue the points being made? Again, these are people I don't even know. They don't make videos, they don't do anything. Why do they need to do all this bullshit? Why do they have to waste time with the insults when all they have to do is get to the point? I mean, again, they have an expectation that I totally disagree with Professor Lewin when he made that idiotic video about how there's two different voltages in the same location. It's just an idiotic premise. It makes physics look ridiculous to argue that. That clearly can't be happening. It's obviously your probes, your way of measuring the voltage is what's broken, not the voltage at the location. But should I type a comment saying, "You're a dumb fuck, you dumb old lunatic"? Why would I waste you have the knowledge of a 5th grade mathematics? I mean, how can you think physics works that way? How could you be that fucking stupid? No. You just make the point. Alright. So, yeah, so that's it. That's enough. Down to my last 10 days here in this location. Just so much to do. And the horror of moving, I just can't, just can't imagine how I'm going to slide through this transition. But I must endeavor to persevere. It just looks like train wreck coming, that's all. I can hear the whistle. Just how foobar will I be? Till the next time, such. Looks like it's still working, so that's good.